Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Professor Barry here. Hope you are doing well, navigating all of your classes, all that you're doing. Amazing stuff, I am sure. Keeping on track. That's always kind of the key idea in an online class, is just creating a schedule and staying to that schedule. Kind of picking off things throughout the course of the week, so you're not sort of letting yourself wait till the end of the week to get things done. Just FYI, before we kind of go over the articles for today, the quizzes are designed and intended to reaffirm kind of key ideas and perspectives that are being offered in the readings. They're a good way to prepare for the midterm and the final. So, the preparation that you put into the quizzes will be helpful to you for the midterm exam and the final exam. One way to think about it, the quizzes are formative, kind of forming your ideas, forming baseline knowledge, and then the midterm exam and the final are summative. So you're pulling the pieces together, right? So that's the idea. As always, if you have questions, let me know. So yeah, I'm super glad to have this technology, the ability to communicate ideas to you this way, because these articles, without a context around them, it's going to be harder to understand its importance and its connection to the class. So let's today, for 15, 20 minutes, talk about both articles, starting off with the Kellner article. So Kellner, that article provides really a foundation to sort of thinking about how we can analyze popular culture, the reason and importance for analyzing popular culture. So I guess a couple different things from that. One is this idea of cultural studies as a discipline. Starting in the University of Birmingham was mentioned in the article. So University of Birmingham Center of Cultural Studies, so contemporary cultural studies. So that particular academic institution and that department within the University of Birmingham was kind of at the forefront of developing a method, a theory, a perspective, and research on examining popular culture. And as Kellner talks about, the importance of understanding and dissecting and sort of getting into popular culture and mass media is that increasingly, starting with the rise of television in the 1950s, then you move on 1960s, 1970s, and we get sort of further, advancements of technologies, that the proliferation and development of mass media, advertising, marketing, consumption, all these different kind of things are becoming more central to our lives. They guide our lives, they impact our lives, and we need tools to be able to critique and understand, because they are so powerful. Images are incredibly powerful. Narratives, stories, things that come through in terms of the media, through marketing and advertising, can leave significant impressions on us, can shape us in ways that may be to our own disadvantage as individuals, as groups, and as a larger social system. So the goal of cultural studies is to study society, analyze it, critique it, and hold it responsible. To be able to advocate for a system of greater equality, for greater representation and reinforcement of democratic ideals of justice and equality, mutual regard, mutual respect. So it is a project, cultural studies, that is social justice oriented. And I guess, this could get into a longer discussion about the role of research and different philosophical ideas about the role of research. Kellner and the cultural studies idea is that it is important and valuable and necessary to analyze, use models of social science, use data, use research to be able to empirically identify patterns and trends, and then to be able to to use that information to advocate for change. That change could be in terms of regulation of industry, for example, could be different kinds of changes. So part of that article is about just sort of getting into this idea of what is cultural studies. The recognition that what we see in terms of the mass media, we'll just kind of start with just sort of thinking about images and representations. That representations they're part of a contested terrain. So if we can kind of go back to our social construction of reality, nothing has any inherent meaning to it, but rather from that social construction perspective is we develop meaning. We develop meaning within the groups that we operate in, our social location influences the meanings that we assign to things. And then so culture is a place of contested terrain. There's oppositional ideas. Colin Kaepernick, I think, is sort of this great example where initially, right, when he kneeled during the halftime show, this controversy it was electric, right? Those that were very supportive of him taking the opportunity to protest issues that were impacting the Black community and representing and supporting Black Lives Matter. There are those who are strongly in opposition, right? So it's this contested terrain of trying to figure out different groups assigning different meaning to kneeling at the halftime show. What's super interesting, right, is that now the NFL, the commissioner of the NFL, as well as leadership within the NFL, supportive of athletes taking a stand in Black Lives Matter. A lot of Americans' public attitudes have shifted, right, over that as well. You still have some individuals for sure who are opposed to athletes taking a stand. I just find it kind of ironic to be critical of sort of those who are sort of that side or that position of that we shouldn't politicize sporting events. Especially after 9/11, football and militarization of kind of a nationalism has become more pronounced. Having flyovers before the start of a football game has made football more political. So it's kind of ironic or kind of just interesting, the contradiction of a position that says we shouldn't make football political, but yet allow for football to be political in different ways that represent nationalism and militarization. And I think that's kind of an important thing to kind of to give recognition to. So Kellner gets into that, that's part of the cultural studies idea, is that culture is a contested terrain, different groups assigning meaning to things that are going on within culture. And ultimately, the idea for cultural studies is to understand and empower us as a community to critique things that are going on and to shift things in terms of representations, meaning that represent more democratic ideals. Okay, finally, for the cultural studies article, I want to kind of identify as sort of this tripartite approach, these three different areas of examining popular culture. And to kind of do a brief walkthrough of each of them. So the first one is the production of culture. And this, you can think about the political economy or how institutions that produce popular culture are organized. And that could be from management philosophy to the demographic composition, so race, class, gender identity, sexual orientation, religious background, et cetera, of individuals who are in leadership, who are workers. So what is the composition? What is the organization? The number of mass media outlets, the consolidation of mass media that really escalated in the 1990s until today. So the number of media outlets that control the amount of information that Americans consume. That's an issue of the political economy or the production of culture. Independent media versus mass media. Different outlets for music, different outlets for different aspects of culture. These are all about the political economy of culture itself. So as you watch the film this week, like Real Engine, representations of Native Americans in film, think about Hollywood, right? Hollywood, in representations like the director, the writer, why are they writing the way that they are? Why are they sort of representing Native Americans, whites, cowboys in very particular ways? This has a lot to do with the political economy in terms of whose voice is being represented through these particular institutions. So on the one side, and before I forget too, is if you look in the syllabus, there's a podcast recommendation, not required, but a recommendation on race and the culture industries. And it's a really interesting podcast, an interview with a sociologist, a book that he wrote. And he talks about basically this issue of racial representation in the political economy or the production of culture. And his argument that he provides, or perspective he provides, is that by having more people of color, more African Americans in leadership positions within institutions that are producing culture does not necessarily change representations, the stories, the approach to stories that are being told in the mass media, because the overall umbrella of the institution is rooted in ideas of profit. And there's a logic, not only of profit, but a logic that's embedded in these institutions to reinforce the existing kind of power structure in society. So having a voice from a position of a person of color is going to be more threatening to that institution. So while it may be beneficial to have people of color within an institution in terms of leadership positions, he's critiquing that and saying, well, yes, we need to move in that direction, and also recognize by having a greater diversity within the workforce in management and upper management positions does not necessarily change the outcome of representations because of the overall logic and philosophy of the institution itself. So that's all production of culture stuff. The second of the three of the tripartite approach is audience reception. So it's about how people, their social position, male, I guess it's your gender, your sexual orientation, race, your class, region of the country, all these different parts of our identity, how your social position shapes how you view something. And it's not, if keeping in mind in the social sciences, we're not interested in the individual, but rather patterns among groups. So kind of what is the pattern among individuals of a particular political position or particular social position? How do they read the text, right? And this is what you're going to get in terms of the article Cowboys and Indians Perceptions of Western Films by Shively. That is like a key, that's like if you continue on in your academics and continue on taking classes in cultural studies, that's an often cited article because it gets into this idea of audience reception. So Indians, Native Americans on reservations, not on reservations, whites. How do these three different groups, how do they interpret? What is the meaning that they are assigning to Western films? And it's super fascinating. And I think that article, particularly for me, is the Native Americans on reservations and Native Americans not living on reservations, and the different interpretations they're providing this text of these films. So that's kind of like the audience reception side. It's kind of paying attention to how audience position, social position, shapes how individuals view a particular text. And then the final thing is looking at, from the tripartite approach, is areas of representation or textual analysis. So being able to analyze the text. What does it communicate? If you look at gender and advertising, just type that into a search engine. Gender advertising, and pull up images, right? And we start to do this textual analysis. I was looking this morning for some reason, I was reading something on representation of basketball players, African Americans, basketball players, and comparing differences between the white athlete, the black athlete, and representations. Super interesting, right? How representations, if we can understand them, they can be a way to try to understand larger issues that are going on in society itself. And I think gender representations is sort of another way to get there. I'm not sure if the video is available on the Canopy or not, but the Media Education Foundation, you could type this into a search engine, Media Education Foundation, Booze in a Bottle, maybe is the name of it. It's alcohol, maybe just type in alcohol advertising, Media Education Foundation. And it deals a lot with, representation, gender representations around alcohol advertising. And it's very common. I mean, one kind of trope or one narrative in alcohol advertising is have one guy and 5 women around him and drinking and consuming alcohol, and it's sort of like they're hanging all over him, right? You'd never find that the other way around, 1 woman and 5 guys sort of around her. And then it would just be like, it's a revealing, that representation is revealing ideologies and perspectives and beliefs around ideas of gender that are situated in larger culture, and they're reinforcing particular ideas about gender as well. So that's kind of the approach. That's what's going on. If you think about it in terms of the Shively article is dealing both with, well, it's dealing with the audience reception, not so much the representation, right? So the film, Real Engines, is really dealing with the representation, but you also could be thinking about the other part of the tripartite approach is the production of culture itself. Yeah, hope you enjoy the film, the articles for the week. I think they're really interesting, fascinating, a lot of good food for thought. I mean, you could spend weeks just on those articles, kind of digesting, kind of pulling them apart. If you have any questions, let me know. Yeah, appreciate all you do. Good luck. I mean, enjoy the wiki this week too, providing sort of different examples. Your goal of the wiki for this particular week is to, actually, hold on one second. All right, so thinking about sort of what the wiki is for this week. So the wiki is to provide 3 to 5 different examples of representation, of, think about it as misrepresentation, or think about it of 3 to 5 different examples of representation that are illustrating kind of issues of inequity, issues of misrepresentation, issues that are related to the dominant ideals in society. And maybe it's just kind of like, maybe that's a little bit confusing. So think about it in terms of looking at gender and advertising as one example. So where do we see misrepresentation? So provide 3 to 5 different examples of misrepresentation. If I go back to like looking at advertising, there's, you're going to find a lot of advertising that are illustrating, this sort of idea of the hypersexualization of women, hypermasculinity in terms of males. But kind of scratch around a little bit, like products that you like, products you enjoy. You can look at things today. You can look at things back in the past, different historical time periods. You can look across culture. So don't restrict it to just the United States, but look at across nations. But to identify, the goal is to identify 3 to 5 different examples of things that are reinforcing inequities that are oppressive in terms of race, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, in terms of representations. And post those images into your wiki, and then provide some commentary either after each one or after the 3 to 5 that you provide, about what these reveal about representation and why do we look at representation. So some discussion about the importance and the value of looking at representation. All right, be safe, be well. Yeah, have a great week. This is Tom tuning out. Peace and be well.